There are moments in history when the ordinary world cracks open and something impossible slips through. These are not the grand mythological events of ancient times, not the dragons of legend or the gods of forgotten pantheons. These are quiet intrusions, brief and terrible, witnessed by ordinary people living ordinary lives in ordinary towns. They happen in the space between streetlights, in the gap between heartbeats, in those fleeting seconds when the familiar becomes utterly alien. What makes them so unsettling is not their scale, but their intimacy. They do not announce themselves with thunder or fire. They simply appear, witnessed by a handful of souls who will spend the rest of their lives trying to convince themselves and others of what they saw. This is the story of one such moment. It happened over the course of 25 hours in a small Massachusetts town in the spring of 1977, and it involved 7 witnesses who saw something that should not exist. The town of Dover, Massachusetts, sits 17 miles southwest of Boston. In 1977, it was a quiet residential community of fewer than 5,000 people, the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, and the most exciting event of the week might be a high school basketball game. The streets were lined with colonial-era homes and ancient oak trees. The roads wound through wooded areas that had stood largely unchanged for centuries. It was, by all accounts, an unremarkable New England town, the sort of place where nothing particularly strange had ever happened, and nothing particularly strange was ever expected to happen. The residents lived peaceful lives, raised their families, went to work, and assumed that the world operated according to a set of reliable and predictable laws. They were wrong. On the night of April 21st, those laws were suspended, and something walked among them that defied every rational explanation. The first witness was a 17-year-old boy named Bill Bartlett. He was an ordinary teenager by all accounts, a student at Dover Sherborne Regional High School with no history of making up stories or seeking attention. On that particular evening, he was doing what countless teenagers had done before him, driving around town with friends, enjoying the freedom of having a car and nowhere in particular to be. Bill was behind the wheel of his Volkswagen, heading north on Farm Street with 2 friends riding along. The time was approximately 10:30 in the evening. The night was clear and cool, typical for late April in Massachusetts. The road ahead was dark, illuminated only by the car's headlights cutting through the shadows cast by the trees that lined both sides of the narrow street. Nothing about the moment suggested that Bill's life was about to change forever. The world felt normal, predictable, safe. That sense of safety was about to be shattered. As the Volkswagen rounded a curve, the headlights swept across a low stone wall that ran along the left side of the road. It was the kind of wall that dotted the New England landscape, built centuries ago by colonial farmers clearing their fields. In the beam of light, Bill saw something moving on top of the wall. His first thought, the automatic assumption his brain made in that split second, was that it was a dog, or perhaps a cat. But as the light held steady on the figure, that assumption crumbled. What he saw was not an animal. It was not anything he had ever seen before or could have imagined. The creature was roughly the size of a young child, perhaps 3 to 4 feet tall, but its proportions were all wrong. Its body was thin, almost emaciated, with long spindly limbs that seemed too fragile to support even its slight weight. The skin appeared smooth and hairless, with a color that Bill would later describe as resembling a peach or tan, glowing faintly in the headlights. But it was the head that burned itself into Bill's memory. The creature's head was enormous, completely out of proportion to its small body, roughly the size of a watermelon. The shape was not quite round, but slightly elongated, like an inverted teardrop. And the eyes. The eyes were the worst part. They were huge, far larger than any human eyes, and they glowed with an orange light that seemed to come from within. They were positioned on the sides of the head, giving the creature a disturbingly alien appearance. There was no nose that Bill could see, no ears, no hair. The mouth, if it had one, was not visible from his vantage point. The creature was holding onto the wall with long fingers that wrapped around the stones. For a moment that felt like an eternity, but could only have lasted 2 or 3 seconds. Bill and the creature locked eyes. The orange glow seemed to intensify as they stared at each other across the short distance. Bill's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his breath caught in his throat. Every instinct in his body was screaming that what he was seeing could not be real, yet there it was, undeniably present. Then the car passed, and the thing was behind them. Bill's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. His heart hammered in his chest like a drum. He knew, with absolute certainty, that what he had just seen was real. It was not a trick of the light, not a misidentified animal, not a hallucination. It was a living creature, something that existed in the physical world, something that had looked back at him with those terrible glowing eyes. He immediately told his friends what he had seen. Mike Mazzocca and Andy Brody, sitting in the back seat, had not noticed anything unusual. They had been talking, looking at each other rather than out the window at the stone wall. Bill's description sounded insane even to his own ears, but he could not shake the image from his mind. The creature's face was burned into his memory like a photograph. Bill turned the car around and drove back to the spot where he had seen the creature. They searched the area with flashlights, examining the stone wall and the woods beyond with careful attention. There was nothing. No footprints, no evidence that anything had been there, no disturbance in the leaves or grass. The night was silent and empty, as if the encounter had never happened. But Bill knew it had. The image remained vivid and sharp in his mind. Bill Bartlett returned home that evening profoundly shaken. He went to his room and did something that would prove crucial in the days to come. He drew a picture of what he had seen. Bill was an art student, skilled with a pencil, and he rendered the creature with careful detail while the image was still fresh in his mind. The drawing showed a being with a bulbous head, enormous eyes, thin limbs, and that strange peach-colored skin. He showed the drawing to his father, trying to explain what had happened on Farm Street. His father, a practical man, listened with the kind of patient skepticism that parents reserve for teenage stories that strain credibility. But he could see that his son was genuinely disturbed. Bill was not the type to make things up, and he was clearly convinced of what he had seen. The drawing was dated and set aside. Bill tried to sleep. The image of those glowing eyes kept him awake for hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the creature staring back at him from the stone wall. The orange glow seemed to burn through his eyelids. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. Nothing in his experience, nothing in his understanding of the world, could account for what he had seen on that dark road. 15 hours later, at approximately midnight on April 22nd, a 15-year-old named John Baxter was walking home from his girlfriend's house. John lived about a mile away, and on this particular night, he had decided to walk rather than call for a ride. It was a decision he would remember for the rest of his life. The route took him along Miller Hill Road, another quiet, tree-lined street in Dover. As he walked, John became aware of a figure approaching him from the opposite direction. At first, he assumed it was a friend, perhaps someone he knew from school walking home. The figure was small, about the size of a child, and it seemed to be walking with an odd, unsteady gait. John called out a greeting into the darkness. There was no response. The figure stopped moving. John stopped as well, suddenly uncertain. Something about the silhouette was wrong. The proportions were off in a way he could not quite articulate. The head was too large for the body. The limbs seemed too long and thin. The posture was strange, neither fully upright nor fully crouched. A chill ran down John's spine, that ancient primal warning that something dangerous was near. His greeting died in his throat as he stared at the motionless figure ahead. John took a step forward, trying to get a better look in the darkness. The figure immediately scurried off the road and down an embankment toward a wooded area. The movement was not human. It was too quick, too low to the ground, moving on all fours with a disturbing fluidity that reminded John of a spider or an insect. No person moved like that. No animal he knew moved like that either. John's curiosity overcame his initial fear, and he followed. He carefully made his way down the slope, using the trees for support, until he reached a rocky area near a shallow gully. The moonlight filtered through the bare branches overhead, casting everything in silver and shadow. There, Perched on top of a boulder, like some grotesque gargoyle, was the creature. John was now close enough to see it clearly in the pale light. It was small, perhaps 3 or 4 feet tall, with a thin body and long, thin fingers that were wrapped around the rock with an almost prehensile grip. The head was enormous and egg-shaped, completely hairless and smooth like polished stone, and the eyes were the size of shooter marbles, glowing with an eerie orange light that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within. They dominated the creature's face, unblinking and utterly alien. John Baxter stood frozen, staring at the impossible thing before him. The creature stared back, unmoving, its large eyes reflecting the moonlight with that internal orange glow. The moment stretched on, neither human nor creature moving, locked in a tableau of mutual observation. John could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He could hear the whisper of wind through the trees, but the creature made no sound at all. Then John's nerve broke. He turned and ran, scrambling back up the embankment and onto the road with a speed born of pure terror. He ran the rest of the way home, his lungs burning, his legs pumping, not daring to look back to see if the thing was following him. When he burst through his front door, he was pale and shaking, his hands trembling as he tried to catch his breath. His parents could see immediately that something had happened. John told them what he had seen, the words tumbling out in a rush, barely coherent. Like Bill Bartlett's father, John's parents were skeptical but concerned. Their son was not prone to flights of fancy. He was a level-headed kid, not the type to make up stories or panic without reason. Something had clearly frightened him badly. They could see the fear in his eyes. The next day, John went to school and heard a rumor that was circulating among the students. Someone had seen something strange on Farm Street the night before. John tracked down the source of the rumor and found Bill Bartlett. The two boys had never been particularly close, running in different social circles, but they knew each other by sight. When they compared notes, a chill ran through both of them. They had seen the same thing. The descriptions matched almost perfectly. The enormous head, the glowing orange eyes, the thin body, the long fingers, the strange peach-colored skin. Neither boy had told the other what they had seen before this moment. There was no way they could have coordinated their stories. The realization hit them with the force of a revelation. Whatever this thing was, it was real. It existed, and it was somewhere in Dover. But the sightings were not over. On the same night that John Baxter had his encounter, approximately 30 minutes later, 2 more teenagers were driving along Springdale Avenue. Will Taintor was behind the wheel, with his girlfriend Abby Brabham in the passenger seat. The time was approximately 12:30 in the morning on April 22nd. They were heading home after an evening out, talking quietly, not expecting anything unusual. As they drove past a wooded area, Abby suddenly grabbed Will's arm and pointed. There, crouched by the side of the road near a drainage ditch, was a creature. Will slowed the car, and both teenagers got a clear look at it in the headlights. The thing was small, hairless, with a large head and thin body. Abby noticed that the eyes appeared to glow green rather than orange, but otherwise the description matched what Bill and John had reported. The skin was tan or beige, smooth and hairless like a dolphin's. The fingers were long and appeared to have too many joints. The overall appearance was profoundly alien, something that looked like it had been assembled by someone who had heard a description of a human being but had never actually seen one. The creature looked at the car for a moment, its eyes catching the light, then scurried away into the woods with that same disturbing speed. Will and Abby, like the witnesses before them, were deeply unsettled by what they had seen. They drove to Abby's house and told her parents what had happened. Abby's father, a rational man not given to believing in monsters, nevertheless took his daughter's fears seriously. She was genuinely frightened, her hands shaking as she described the creature. Will corroborated her story completely, his own voice tight with residual fear. The two of them had seen something. That much was clear to Mr. Brabham. Whether it was what they thought it was, well, that was a different question. But he could see no reason for the teenagers to make up such a story. They had nothing to gain from it and everything to lose, given how ridiculous it sounded. That night, 4 different people in 2 separate incidents, spread across a few hours and in different locations, had reported seeing the same impossible creature. The probability of coincidence was shrinking to nothing. By the following day, word of the sightings had spread throughout Dover like wildfire. The town's teenagers were buzzing with the news, and soon adults were hearing about it as well. Some dismissed it as teenage pranks or overactive imaginations fueled by too many horror movies. Others were not so sure. The witnesses were all credible kids, not troublemakers or attention seekers. They had nothing to gain from making up such a story. In fact, they had everything to lose. The ridicule was immediate and intense. Classmates mocked them, adults looked at them with barely concealed skepticism, and the story began to take on a life of its own. Bill Bartlett, in particular, found himself at the center of unwanted attention. He had been the first witness, and his drawing was now being passed around the school. Some students believed him, most did not, but everyone was talking about it. The drawing itself was remarkably detailed and consistent with the descriptions given by the other witnesses. It showed a creature that looked like nothing in the zoological record, nothing in local folklore, nothing that anyone had ever seen or heard of before. It was completely original, utterly alien, and deeply disturbing in its strangeness. The local police were notified of the sightings, but there was little they could do. No crime had been committed. No one had been hurt or threatened. No property had been damaged. A few officers drove through the areas where the creature had been seen, shining their flashlights into the woods, but they found nothing. What could they investigate? Reports of a monster were not something that the Dover Police Department was equipped to handle. The officers filed the reports and moved on to more pressing matters. But one person was taking the sightings very seriously. Loren Coleman, a cryptozoologist who had been researching mysterious creature sightings for years, heard about the Dover events and immediately traveled to the town. Coleman was a careful investigator, not prone to believing every wild story that came his way. He had studied countless reports of strange creatures and knew how to separate genuine phenomena from hoaxes. What he found in Dover intrigued him deeply. Coleman interviewed all 4 primary witnesses separately, meeting with each of them in their homes and asking detailed questions about what they had seen. He examined their accounts, looking for inconsistencies or signs of collusion. What he found was remarkable. The witnesses all described the same basic creature, but there were subtle differences in the details that actually lent credibility to their stories. If they had been making it up, or had been influenced by each other's accounts, the descriptions would likely have been identical. Instead, they varied in small ways that suggested independent observations of the same entity. Bill saw orange eyes. Abby saw green eyes. This could be explained by different lighting conditions or the angle of observation, perhaps even by some biological function of the creature itself, like a chameleon changing colors. John saw the creature from a different distance and perspective than Bill, yet the core details remained consistent. The enormous head, the thin body, the long fingers, the hairless skin. These elements appeared in every account. Coleman also examined the character of the witnesses. He spoke to their parents, their teachers, and their friends. What emerged was a picture of 4 ordinary teenagers with no history of making up stories or seeking publicity. In fact, most of them were actively trying to avoid the attention that the sightings had brought them. Bill Bartlett was particularly credible. He was an art student, thoughtful and serious, not the class clown or the attention seeker. His drawing of the creature had been made immediately after the sighting, before he had talked to anyone else about what he had seen. It was a contemporaneous record, the kind of evidence that investigators prize. Coleman also noted that none of the witnesses were trying to profit from their story. They were not selling interviews or seeking publicity. They had simply seen something extraordinary and told people about it, only to find themselves mocked and disbelieved. This pattern is common in genuine paranormal experiences. Hoaxers typically seek attention and often try to monetize their claims. These teenagers wanted nothing more than to be believed and then left alone. The question, of course, was what they had seen. Coleman considered and rejected several mundane explanations, Could it have been a dog or a cat seen in poor lighting? The descriptions were far too specific and consistent for that to be plausible. A dog does not have a head the size of a watermelon, eyes that glow orange, or long thin fingers. Could it have been a monkey or an ape that had escaped? Coleman checked with every zoo and animal facility in the region. None reported any missing primates. Furthermore, monkeys and apes are covered in hair, and every witness had described the creature as completely hairless. Could it have been a person, perhaps a child, playing a prank? Again, the description did not fit. The proportions were all wrong. The eyes glowed in a way that human eyes do not, and the movement was described as distinctly non-human. Coleman also considered the possibility of a hoax perpetrated by the witnesses themselves. Could they have constructed some kind of puppet or costume to fool people? He examined this theory carefully and found it wanting. The sightings occurred over a short time frame in different locations. There would have been no time to move a prop from one site to another. The witnesses were not working together closely. Bill and John did not even know each other well before these events. The idea that they had coordinated an elaborate hoax involving 4 people who barely knew each other, executed over the course of 25 hours in multiple locations, all for no apparent gain and considerable social cost, strained credibility far more than the idea that they had simply seen something real and unexplained. Coleman concluded that the witnesses had indeed seen something extraordinary. The sightings brought immediate media attention. Newspapers picked up the story, and reporters descended on Dover looking for interviews. The witnesses, particularly Bill Bartlett, found themselves in the uncomfortable position of minor celebrities. Television crews arrived, asking them to recount their experiences for the cameras. Local radio stations discussed the sightings. The story spread beyond Dover, beyond Massachusetts, reaching a national audience hungry for mystery and wonder. And with that attention came a name. Someone, perhaps a journalist looking for a catchy headline, dubbed the creature the Dover Demon. The name stuck. It was evocative, mysterious, and had a nice alliterative ring to it. The Dover Demon became part of American cryptozoological lore, joining the ranks of creatures like Bigfoot, the Mothman, and the Jersey Devil. But unlike those other entities, the Dover Demon had been seen by multiple credible witnesses over a very short period of time, making it one of the most concentrated flaps of creature sightings on record. Theories about the nature of the Dover Demon proliferated. Some suggested it was an extraterrestrial being, perhaps a visitor from another planet who had crash-landed or was conducting some kind of reconnaissance. The large head and eyes, the thin body, the strange glowing eyes all fit the popular conception of extraterrestrial visitors, but there was no evidence of a spacecraft in the area, no reports of strange lights in the sky, no physical trace evidence that would suggest an extraterrestrial presence. The witnesses had seen the creature on the ground, moving through the woods and along the roads. If it was an alien, it had either crash-landed or was conducting its reconnaissance on foot, which seemed oddly primitive for a civilization capable of interstellar travel. Others proposed that the creature was some kind of unknown animal, a species that had somehow eluded scientific discovery. But what kind of animal? Nothing in the zoological record came close to matching the description. Could it have been a genetic mutation, some kind of deformed animal that appeared briefly and then died? Again, the problem was the consistency of the sightings. 4 different people in 2 nights all saw the same type of creature. A single mutant animal could not explain multiple sightings in different locations unless it was traveling around the town. Some researchers suggested that the Dover Demon might be related to other cryptids reported in New England and beyond. There were similarities to creatures reported in other parts of the world. The Flatwoods Monster of West Virginia, seen in 1952, had a large head and glowing eyes. The Hopkinsville Goblins of Kentucky, seen in 1955, were small and hairless. But these comparisons raised more questions than they answered. If the Dover Demon was part of a larger pattern of creature sightings, what did that pattern mean? Were there multiple species of unknown creatures roaming the earth, each appearing briefly before vanishing back into obscurity? Or were these sightings all manifestations of the same phenomenon, appearing in different forms to different witnesses. The mystery deepened rather than resolved with each new comparison. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Dover demon case was its brevity. The creature was seen on 2 consecutive nights, and then never again. There were no follow-up sightings, no ongoing encounters, no physical evidence left behind. It appeared, was witnessed by 7 people, and then vanished as completely as if it had never existed. This pattern is unusual in cryptozoological cases. Most famous cryptids, like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, have long histories. They are seen repeatedly over years or even decades by many different witnesses, but the Dover demon was different. It was a concentrated burst of sightings and then nothing. This brevity has led some researchers to speculate that the creature was not a permanent resident of Dover, but a transient visitor. Perhaps it was passing through the area, moving from one location to another. Perhaps it was lost, separated from others of its kind. Or perhaps it died shortly after the sightings, succumbing to injury or illness. The lack of a body is curious, but not unprecedented. Bodies of unknown animals are rarely found, even when they die in populated areas. Scavengers work quickly, and decomposition in the wild is rapid. If the Dover demon did die in the woods around Dover, its remains might have been consumed or scattered within days, leaving nothing for investigators to find. Another theory suggests that the Dover demon was not a physical creature at all, but some kind of paranormal or interdimensional entity. This theory proposes that the creature slipped through from another reality, appearing briefly in our world before returning to its own dimension. The glowing eyes might have been a sign of its otherworldly origin, a visible marker of its alien nature. This explanation accounts for both the appearance and the disappearance of the creature. It also explains why no physical evidence was ever found. If the Dover demon was not a flesh and blood animal, but a temporary manifestation from another plane of existence, it would leave no trace when it departed. This theory is, of course, impossible to prove or disprove. It ventures into the realm of pure speculation, relying on concepts that are outside the boundaries of conventional science. But it remains a possibility, however remote, for those willing to consider it. The psychological impact on the witnesses was profound and lasting. Bill Bartlett, in particular, struggled with the aftermath of his sighting. The ridicule from his peers was intense. Many people assumed he had made up the story for attention, despite his consistent denials. The drawing he had made became both evidence of his experience and a target for mockery. Some classmates suggested he had seen a moose or a horse, explanations that made no sense. Others accused him of lying outright, of creating an elaborate hoax. The stress of being disbelieved, of having his character questioned, weighed heavily on him. He had seen something real, something that had terrified him, and instead of support and understanding, he received mockery and suspicion. This is a common pattern in paranormal encounters. Witnesses often report that the social consequences of coming forward are worse than the initial frightening experience itself. John Baxter faced similar challenges. His encounter had been up close and personal, the creature staring at him from atop that boulder with those enormous glowing eyes. The image haunted his dreams for years. He would wake in the night, heart pounding, convinced that he could see those eyes in the darkness of his bedroom. Like Bill, he found that many people did not believe him. The story sounded too fantastic, too much like science fiction. But John knew what he had seen. The memory was crystal clear, burned into his mind with the intensity of trauma. He had not misidentified an animal. He had not hallucinated. He had seen something that should not exist, something that violated every rule of nature as he understood it. The knowledge that such a thing was possible, that the world contained mysteries far stranger than he had imagined, changed him permanently. Will Taintor and Abby Brabham had the advantage of having witnessed the creature together, which meant they could corroborate each other's account. This made them slightly harder to dismiss than the solo witnesses, but they still faced skepticism and ridicule. The fact that Abby had seen green eyes while the others reported orange eyes became a point of contention. Skeptics seized on this difference as evidence that the witnesses were making things up or had seen different things. But Coleman, and other serious investigators recognized that color perception can vary based on lighting conditions, angle of observation, and even individual differences in vision. The green versus orange discrepancy was not a fatal flaw in the testimony. It was simply evidence that the witnesses were reporting what they actually saw, rather than coordinating their stories to match perfectly. Real observations of real events always contain these kinds of minor variations. As the years passed, the Dover demon faded from public consciousness. The intense media attention of 1977 gave way to other stories, other mysteries. The witnesses grew up, moved on with their lives, started families and careers, but they never forgot what they had seen. Bill Bartlett, decades later, would still speak about his encounter with the same conviction and clarity he had shown as a 17-year-old. He never wavered in his account. He never changed key details or embellished his story to make it more exciting. He simply maintained, quietly and consistently, that on the night of April 21st, 1977, he had seen something extraordinary. John Baxter, Will Taintor, and Abby Brabham all told similar stories. They had seen something real. They knew what they had seen, and no amount of skepticism or ridicule could change that fundamental fact. Their conviction is itself a piece of evidence. The Dover demon case remains one of the most compelling and mysterious creature sightings in American history. It has all the elements of a perfect cryptozoological event. Multiple credible witnesses, consistency in descriptions, a concentrated time frame, and no satisfactory conventional explanation. The witnesses had nothing to gain and much to lose by coming forward. They were not attention seekers or publicity hounds. They were ordinary teenagers who saw something extraordinary. The lack of physical evidence is frustrating, but not dispositive. Most cryptid sightings do not produce physical evidence. Witnesses see something, the creature disappears, and investigators arrive to find nothing but testimony. This is the nature of the phenomenon. If we dismiss every sighting that lacks physical proof, we dismiss nearly all of them. The Dover demon may have been a genuine unknown animal, a visitor from another world, or something else entirely beyond our current understanding. What cannot be dismissed is the experience of the witnesses. 7 people, in 2 nights, saw something that terrified and amazed them. Their accounts, given independently and without coordination, match in all essential details. They described a creature unlike anything in the known animal kingdom, something with a massive head, glowing eyes, thin body, and hairless skin. They saw it clearly, in good lighting conditions, at close range. Their testimony stands as a monument to the fact that the world still contains mysteries, that nature has not yet revealed all its secrets, and that human experience sometimes transcends the boundaries of the known and the comfortable. The Dover demon reminds us that reality is stranger and more complex than we often acknowledge. For 25 hours in the spring of 1977, the impossible walked the streets of a small Massachusetts town, and 7 ordinary people bore witness to it. The question of what the Dover demon was may never be answered. It appeared and vanished, leaving behind only memories and drawings and the unshakable conviction of those who saw it. Perhaps it was a creature from another world, briefly stranded in ours. Perhaps it was a species unknown to science, existing in small numbers in the wild places of the earth. Perhaps it was something even stranger, something that defies categorization entirely. Whatever it was, it represents the enduring mystery at the heart of existence. Despite all our science and technology, despite our sophisticated instruments and our vast databases of knowledge, the world can still surprise us. It can still present us with phenomena that do not fit into our neat categories and explanations. The Dover demon is a reminder that wonder and terror still exist in the spaces between what we know and what we think we know. The witnesses to the Dover demon are now middle-aged, looking back on that strange spring with a mixture of fascination and unease. They have spent decades processing what they saw, trying to make sense of an experience that defies sense. Some have given interviews over the years, recounting their stories for documentaries and podcasts. Others have chosen to remain silent, sharing their experience only with family and close friends, but all of them carry the same burden. They know what they saw. They know that on those 2 nights in April 1977, something impossible walked among them. They know that the creature was real as the stone walls and the trees and the roads of Dover. They know, and that knowledge has shaped their lives in ways both subtle and profound. They are witnesses to the unknown, keepers of a mystery that may never be solved. The town of Dover itself has become forever associated with the creature. The Dover demon is now part of the town's identity, mentioned in local histories and tourist guides. Some residents embrace the story as a quirky piece of local color. Others dismiss it as nonsense or wish it would be forgotten. But the story persists, told and retold, each telling adding new layers of interpretation and speculation to the original core of witnessed events. The Dover demon has been featured in numerous books about cryptozoology and unexplained phenomena. It has appeared in television documentaries and internet videos. It has inspired artists and writers, becoming a symbol of the mysterious and the unknown. In popular culture, it occupies a space similar to other famous cryptids, a creature glimpsed briefly and never explained, haunting the edges of collective consciousness. It represents the possibility that the world is not entirely mapped, not entirely understood, not entirely safe and predictable. There are researchers who continue to investigate the Dover demon case, hoping to find new evidence or new witnesses. They comb through old newspapers, interview people who lived in Dover during that period, and search the woods where the creature was seen. They are looking for something, anything, that might provide a definitive answer. But the years have passed, and the trail has grown cold. The creature, if it still exists, has not shown itself again. The mystery remains unsolved. Perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries, reminders of the limits of human knowledge and the vastness of the unknown. The Dover demon asks us to consider the possibility that our understanding of reality is incomplete, that there are things in heaven and earth not dreamed of in our philosophy. It challenges our assumption that we have catalogued and categorized all of nature's creatures. It suggests that the world is still capable of surprise, still capable of presenting us with phenomena that do not fit into our neat taxonomies and explanations. This is an uncomfortable suggestion for a species that prides itself on its mastery of the natural world. We like to think we understand how things work. We like to believe that science has answered all the important questions and that what remains is merely filling in details. The Dover demon tells us otherwise. It tells us that the universe is stranger than we know, perhaps stranger than we can know. It tells us that eyewitness testimony, flawed as it may be, is sometimes all we have to document events that lie outside the boundaries of conventional understanding. The 7 witnesses to the Dover demon were ordinary people who had an extraordinary experience. They did not seek it out. They were not looking for monsters or mysteries. They were simply going about their lives when they encountered something that should not exist. Their reaction was entirely human: fear, fascination, and a desperate need to make sense of the senseless. They told their stories, endured ridicule and disbelief, and carried the memory with them for the rest of their lives. In telling their stories, they gave us a gift. They reminded us that the world is not entirely known, not entirely safe, not entirely predictable. They reminded us that there are still dark places where strange things dwell, still mysteries that resist solution, still phenomena that defy explanation. They reminded us that wonder, real genuine wonder at the strangeness of existence, is still possible in our modern, rationalized, scientifically explained world. The Dover demon, whether it was flesh and blood or something else entirely, represents the persistence of mystery in an age that claims to have banished mystery. It stands as a challenge to our certainties and our assumptions. It asks us to consider the possibility that reality is far more complex than we acknowledge, that the universe contains more things than are dreamed of in our science. It invites us to remain humble in the face of the unknown. And so the creature persists in memory and story, neither proven nor disproven, neither confirmed nor denied. It occupies that liminal space between myth and reality, between belief and skepticism, between the known and the unknown. It haunts the edges of Dover, Massachusetts, a ghost in the collective consciousness, a reminder that the world can still surprise us, still frighten us, still fill us with wonder. The Dover demon walks still, not in the woods but in the imagination. Not in the physical world, but in the stories we tell about that strange spring when 7 people saw something impossible. It walks in the questions we ask about the nature of reality and the limits of knowledge. It walks in the space between what we know and what we wonder. And as long as we tell its story, as long as we remember those 2 nights in April 1977, it will continue to walk. The Dover demon is more than a creature. It is a question. It is an invitation to wonder. It is a reminder that for all our science and technology, for all our databases and our certainties, the world still contains mysteries. It still holds secrets. It still has the power to surprise us, to frighten us, to make us question everything we thought we knew. That power is precious. That power is worth preserving. In the end, the truth of the Dover demon may be less important than what the story represents. Whether the creature was real or imagined, whether it was a physical animal or a psychological phenomenon, it has become real in the stories we tell. It has become part of our mythology, our folklore, our shared cultural narrative about the world and its mysteries. It has earned its place among the cryptids and creatures of legend, not because it has been proven to exist, but because it has been witnessed, reported, believed, and remembered. That is enough. That is how legends are born. 7 people saw something on 2 nights in April 1977. They told their stories. We listened. And in listening, we kept the mystery alive, kept the wonder alive, kept the possibility alive that the world is stranger and more beautiful and more terrifying than we dare to imagine. If you found yourself drawn into this chronicle of the impossible, if you felt the chill of those glowing eyes staring out from the darkness, then join us as we continue to explore the mysteries that haunt the edges of the known world. Subscribe to Baron's Chronicle and become part of our community of seekers and storytellers. Each episode brings you another account of the unexplained, another question without an easy answer, another reminder that the world still holds secrets worth discovering. The Dover demon was just one story among many, one brief window into the unknown. There are others waiting to be told, other mysteries calling out from the shadows, other witnesses with impossible stories that deserve to be heard. Subscribe now and let us walk together into the darkness, armed with nothing but curiosity and the conviction that truth, however strange, is worth pursuing. The unknown awaits, and we would be honored to have you with us as we seek it out.